So, Greg, we're talking about controversial issues, and one of the issues in your book is income disparity. So, what do you think about minimum wage?
Um, Minimum wage and a minimum wage, I think, is very important to have. Otherwise, employers are going to take advantage of people, pay them too little. Each society must decide what is a proper minimum wage, and that in itself is an issue.
Yeah,
What should it be?
actually, I disagree. I'm actually against the minimum wage. I think that, basically all markets find an equilibrium, and that if the wage goes too low, people just won't do the job. And so, basically, if you don't have a minimum wage, eventually the society will come to a wage where people feel comfortable doing that work, that basically things will work out.
And in theory, maybe you're right, but in reality, you're really wrong. I mean, take a look at some of these countries around the world where there are sweatshops, where you have children, because there are no rules regulating labor, and you have children who never educated, who spend their entire lives working almost like slaves in unhealthy conditions. That's what happens when there are no rules to protect workers.
But I think that's somewhat true, but you said the key word, that they're not educated. I think the problem there is that the people aren't educated, and that's what leads to the abject poverty that they might do a job like that. So don't you think that if people were educated more, they would not be willing to work such meaningless jobs, or such jobs that pay so little?
Many of those people, those children who are working like slaves, don't have a chance for any education, and often they're being exploited, not always, but sometimes, by people who have had good education.
Right.
I mean, take a child in some very poor country, has to work to just to find food.
So basically, you're saying
is secondary.
So basically, you're saying that they should have a living wage, that they should make enough money that they can have a decent standard of living.
Everybody should have a decent standard of living, I believe.
I just think that it's really hard to arbitrarily set a price. I mean, that number is always going to go up and down. That even minimum wage somewhat skews the reality that if you just let markets take their natural course, eventually people won't be willing to work.
No, it doesn't work that way, because I think when you just have what's complete free market, you have corrupt people who take advantage of other people.
Well, that actually I do agree with. I do believe in free markets, but one thing that is true, free markets cannot work where there's corruption. I do agree with that. So we agree about something.
Yes. Good thing.
So, Greg, in the last one we were talking about minimum wage, and this is one of the topics in your book, and it's about income disparity. One of the chapters is about income disparity. Now, the opposite would be, should there be a salary cap, which would be that basically you can only earn so much. Like, let's say you can only earn $5 million, $10 million. Nobody can earn more than that. What do you think about that concept?
I personally agree with a salary cap. I'm not sure how much it should be, but definitely the discrepancy in wages is just way too great. There's too many people who have to, the husband and the wife work hard, 40 hours a week or more, both of them, and they're barely getting by. And then you got all these other people who are just buying Rolls-Royce cars and Mercedes and belonging to country clubs. It's not fair.
But, well, for one, though, I mean, Mercedes and Rolls-Royce and those are products that provide jobs. So I would argue with that. I actually, as you can probably tell, I'm against the idea, mainly because, I think that hurts innovation. You look at people like the CEO of a very powerful internet company or software company, and take Google, for example. I'm sure that they make more than 10 million, but their service is used so much around the world that they should get that money. And if people couldn't if they couldn't earn that salary, then maybe they wouldn't have the same motivation and drive to be successful, and that people would lose out as a result.
I think that there's no proof to say that these people are making these products because they're making such tremendous amounts of money. I mean, what came first? The product, and then they got the money in most cases. These people could be, the society can have all sorts of wonderful products and still have a fairer income system. And I have nothing against people becoming rich and making a good salary, or a very good salary, but not such an incredible gap. You have executives of some major international corporations that are making more money than millions of people in the world make combined. The opposite side of not having a cap is that you have people who are making too little. And those people also are working hard. Those people deserve validation. Those people deserve a good life standard, which millions of people across the world are not having.
Well, I think I agree with you about that. I agree with you about that there's a lot of people that work hard and they are undercompensated. And there are a lot of people that get grossly overpaid. But I think that's just a problem of management, and that in some cases, some people do deserve, millions and millions, perhaps billions of dollars if they really have contributed to the product or the outcome. So basically, we're going to disagree on this one.
Yeah.
So, Greg, you have a new book out, and your book has lots of controversial topics, and one of the topics is organ donation. So first, can you explain what organ donation is?
Sure. Organ donation is when a person, living or dead, allows his or her organs to be used in another person.
So, for example, like you donate a liver or kidney or something like that.
That's right.
And usually they have to get it, if the person dies, they have to get it soon.
Yes, it has to be very soon.
Yes.
Right.
So is this something that's common in most countries?
Well, actually, some countries do not allow organ and tissue donation, or they allow only some organs and some tissues and not allow others.
Your book is about controversial topics. What is controversial about organ donation?
There's a lot of controversial aspects to organ donation. Again, as I mentioned, there are differences in every country. Some countries do not allow organ donation. Some allow some organs and won't allow others. And there also have a case that say maybe 1,000 people need a kidney, but there's only 50 kidneys.
Oh, yeah,
Who is going to get it? Should the kidney go to the sickest person, but who might die? Should it go to the oldest person? Should it go to the youngest person? Should it go to the richest person?
Right.
How do you decide? What's a fair way to decide?
Now, also, I think in your book you were talking about medical tourism. Could you explain what that is?
Medical tourism is when people go to a country and for the purpose of medical treatment, which they can't get in their country, either because the treatment's not allowed or it's too expensive. Relating back to the question of controversy, there are a lot of countries in the world which are very poor, and people are willing to sell their organs, actually. So you have rich Arabs, rich Americans, rich Japanese, rich British people, and it's people from many rich countries can't get an organ in their own country, and they'll go to a poor country to buy organs from poor people. Is that right? In some places, it's illegal. There are also laws in many countries that say someone must, before they die, give permission for the body parts to be used. But those body parts are sometimes taken from people after their death without permission.
Yeah, that's pretty controversial stuff. That's pretty deep.
Yeah. Hi, Todd.
Hey, Greg.
Hey, thanks a lot for, interviewing me and letting, the world know about my book.
No problem. What's a good book?
Yeah, I've noticed you don't have any topics like these on your website. Why not?
Right. I don't have too many controversial topics. Well, there's actually technical reasons. One is it just takes too long for people to talk about a controversial topic. So,
Really?
for example, if you really want to get into controversy, it leads to long conversation and people expressing their views and arguing. And the way that the audio is set up on Ello, it's kind of short. I try to keep it under 3 minutes. So that's one reason. But actually, the main reason is because, when people come in, I don't know them. A lot of times I don't know the speakers very well. And so they're not really comfortable arguing with me or arguing with somebody else they don't know about something that's controversial. So we tend to not do that.
Okay. All right. Well, it's just something you might want to think about. I mean, I think there are a lot of people in the world who are really interested in controversial topics.
Well, I think there are some. Like with you, we talked about some like income disparity and medical issues, and I'm comfortable talking about that. But I'm not comfortable talking about, let's say, homosexuality, religious beliefs, abortion, politics, things like that. I just don't feel comfortable doing.
Okay, it's your site, your right to do whatever you want. But I just think maybe some of your listeners would appreciate that, and maybe you could have a little. My suggestion is you have a little one page controversial page or something. Just try it out, and if you get a lot of good reaction, you might want to continue. If it doesn't work out, stop it.
Well, I'll give you an example of one I did recently. I had a woman come in, Stella. She did a great job on the videos, and one of her videos was about an unusual sport in your country, and hers was on cockfighting. And she explained cockfighting or hen fighting in Kenya. And right off the bat, I knew that was going to be a problem because that's illegal in some countries, and some people, animal activists, would be offended. But on the other hand, it's her culture, and I don't feel comfortable saying, what's right or what's wrong about someone else's culture. So I just ended up not putting it on just because I didn't want to have to take a side. I think you can kind of see the problem that sometimes you can put stuff up and it's so easy to alienate maybe a small portion of your audience, and I just don't want to do that. I don't have a side about the issue, but I just don't want to alienate people. I don't want people on one side of an issue to feel upset. So I just play it safe, and I don't talk about it.
Okay. Well, you seem to have a lot of listeners who are very happy, so
I hope
don't
so.
worry about changing it.
I hope so.
Shirley, tell me about your career as a customs inspector.
Yes, many years ago, in a previous lifetime, I worked as a customs officer in Australia. And I don't know if you know, but that means basically taking control or monitoring our borders and checking what comes in and out of the country.
Well, that sounds pretty interesting.
Yeah, it had its moments.
Like, for example?
Well, Australia has very strict quarantine regulations, so we'd often get people trying to smuggle in prohibited food or seeds or plants. And I remember one time there was a man who had an entire sapling, a small tree, strapped to his body. He had the roots kind of in his shoe, and it was strapped to his leg all the way up his body and along his arm, and of course his clothes on top so that we couldn't see them.
Well, that's... Well, now, are you sure he was a person and not an ent?
I don't know. He was doing a good disguise if he was, in fact, a walking ent.
That's true. So what did you do to this poor guy?
We didn't do so much to the poor guy.
So
I think he probably...
tree, I guess.
Well, his tree was confiscated and would be destroyed, and probably he was fined and went to court and would have to pay a fine.
What other things do people smuggle?
All sorts of strange things. Sometimes they smuggle things that they don't even realize are prohibited. So, for example, canned foods like pate or canned meats are also completely prohibited.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of those things they can hold, for example, foot and mouth disease, I think, is resistant to very high temperatures, and it'll last for about 7 or 8 years. So those things are also prohibited. Birds, which is pretty sad because when people bring in something like birds or small animals, the death rate for the animals is extremely high. So usually only about 10% actually survive, and if they get caught, then they can't have them anyway.
Yeah, I can't imagine how if you're trying to smuggle a bird, I have visions of somebody anesthetizing the poor thing and stuffing it into their backpack or something of that sort. And that can't be good.
There's lots of imaginative ways to do that, but all in all, none of them are very good for the birds.
Any reptiles?
Well, yeah, people do smuggle them in. Although actually in the case of Australia, I think we have a bigger problem with them going out because Australia has, I think, the highest number of venomous reptiles in the world and also different types of reptiles. So people taking them out illegally is a big problem. I personally never saw any, fortunately. I actually quite like snakes, but I have a healthy respect for them, so I don't really want to be, engaging with them on a one-to-one personal level.
Oh. Well, I remember watching a television documentary in the United States a few years ago that at one point they brought up the subject of these toads that live in Australia that supposedly have some substance that is for humans hallucinogenic. Does that ring any bells with you?
Well, I don't know about those ones specifically, but I know that in Australia, for example, we have a huge cane toad problem. Cane toads are very big toads. They're about the size of a small cantaloupe, probably. And someone brought them in at the turn of the 20th century, and they got loose in northern Australia. And now there's thousands and thousands and thousands of hectares covered with cane toads, and every year it costs the government a huge amount of money trying to control them, and they've become a pest, and that's one of the reasons why we have such strict quarantine regulations.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Of course, I guess we all know about the rabbits.
Yes, rabbits were first brought into Australia from Britain, and probably just as someone's pet, and one got out.
You weren't on duty that day. So.
I wasn't on duty that day. Probably because it was maybe about 100 years ago. And,
well, you did say previous life, so...
That's true. Anyway, the rabbits got loose, and there was periods in Australian history where there were millions and millions of rabbits and huge control programs. And one of the things that they did to control them, which I think eventually did control them, was they gave them a disease called myxomatosis, which doesn't kill the rabbit but makes them go blind. So they get infected with it. I think it's transmitted by a small flea, and they go blind, and I think rather horribly they either starve to death or they just can't survive, and that was what controlled them in the end.
Until they come up with an immunity to it.
Yeah, they don't seem to have done that. I mean, they're still around a little bit, but not in the numbers, not in the plague numbers that they used to be in the past.
Okay. So now it's toads that are the big problem.
Yeah, well, there's other things as well, but yeah, toads are an ongoing problem.
Hey, Rachel, I heard that actually in Scotland, if you don't have a job, that the government actually gives you money. Like you don't have to work and you still get some money to live.
Yeah, that's right. It's called unemployment benefit, or more casually, it's just called the Dole, being on the Dole. And I think you're only entitled to it if you've actually been paying taxes for a while, and then you go on to a different kind of social welfare. But yeah.
So if somebody's on the dole, if somebody loses their job and then the government gives them money, how long can they be on the dole? Can they be on it indefinitely, forever?
I'm actually not sure. I was on the dole myself for a couple of weeks after I finished university. I know people complain about certain people in the country just never looking for work and being on the dole for years and years, but I don't think there's a lot of truth in that, because when you're on the dole, you have to go to the employment office regularly for interviews, and you have to show that you're looking for work. So I think maybe more of a problem is people on disability benefits. The government wants to reduce the number of people claiming disability because you can stay on that for years.
So for the people that are on the dole, is there like a negative stigma to it? Like if you tell somebody you're on the dole, do people look at you like you're a loser or something like that?
It kind of depends what social class you're coming from, I think. And class is such a big thing in Britain still. I think for my parents' generation, my father, for example, is quite middle class, and I think he would find it very shameful to be on the dole.
So if you didn't have a job and you were on the dole, how would you feel? Would you feel funny about it, or would you feel like it was something that was coming to you for all the hard work you've done?
I didn't feel bad about it at all. I felt like, yeah, this is great. I can, I paid taxes while I was working, so it was kind of like just getting the money back. It was sort of a form of insurance, I felt like.
So because you have the European Union, can somebody theoretically get on the dole in Scotland and then like go and move to Greece or Spain and just live on the dole in a cheaper country?
I think that's not possible because you have to show up at the employment office on a regular basis. So I think that would be impossible.
Oh, that's too bad, because if you could, that's what I'd do.
So what about America? If you lose your job, what happens?
Well, we have what you have. It's not called the dole, though. It's called welfare. And basically what happens is if you lose your job, you can get money from the government, but it's really short term. I think it's only 6 months or a year. But the biggest difference, I think, between Europe and America is the word. We call it welfare. And welfare is really negative. If you tell somebody that you're on welfare or even on unemployment, then people really look at you negatively. Well, actually, let me clarify. There's welfare, which is kind of more long-term, like if you have children, and then there's unemployment, which is money you get from the government if you don't have a job. If you're on unemployment, it's not as bad, but people still kind of look at you like you're a loser, that you should go out and find a job. And if you're on welfare, it has a really negative connotation. People look at you like you're just lazy, basically.
Is that true if you're in a community where, like, the majority of people are on welfare? Are there any places like that in America?
Yeah, there are some really impoverished areas that have a lot of people on welfare, and I imagine that they probably look at it differently. But I think maybe deep down they probably wouldn't want to be on welfare. I mean, the main problem is those people probably weren't given the same quality of education. They don't have the same job opportunities. So deep down they probably wish they had a better job, but they don't, so they're kind of stuck in this vicious cycle that keeps them down. So I think that there might even be resentment, and because they have resentment for basically the terrible hand they've been dealt in life, they look at welfare almost like an entitlement because that's basically the predicament they've been given.
Yeah, that sounds similar to areas of Britain with like extreme deprivation. There's places like that where 3 generations have been on the dole sort of thing. Another problem is for single mothers. Sometimes the cost of childcare means that it's not actually worth them getting a job. Is it the same in America?
Yeah, definitely. And we don't have any government-supported childcare. And actually, there's been instances where law enforcement people like sheriffs or police officers have said that they actually prefer that some single mothers are on welfare because if they're not, then it leads their children to be more susceptible to crime or to life in crime. So if they don't have a strong parent figure at home, it could really have effects, later on in life. So it really is kind of this vicious cycle for single mothers in poor areas that they don't have child care, they don't have education, they don't have job opportunities, and so it's kind of really hard for them to get out, and they feel almost hopeless.
Yeah, so it sounds like we have some things in common, even though our welfare systems are so different. But I hope that these people, their children especially, can get out of this cycle.
So, Julia, I was looking at your website, and I noticed that you did a bike trip in Cambodia.
Yeah, that's right. I joined an organization called PEPI, and we did a ride from Siem Reap to Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh City.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Thank you.
So how did you do this trip? Was it through some organization?
Well, actually, it was a couple of friends of mine lived in the same town as me, and it was their idea. They'd been to Cambodia, they wanted to go back, and they wanted to do something somehow to help in some way. They recognized there was a problem with education in Cambodia, availability of education. They wanted to build a school. So they went online and they found an organization through which they could, if they raised the funds, this organization would build a school for them. And so we incorporated the bike ride as part of the fundraising and as part of the learning process. We wanted to actually go to Cambodia and see the country, as much of the country as possible.
So that's pretty cool. So first, let's talk about the bike ride. Like, what exactly were the details of the trip?
Well, it was this ride has now become an annual event, and obviously that was the first one. So the details were a little sketchy in the beginning. We kind of were making it up as we went along. We planned for about a year in terms of preparation, physical training, and planning the route, and raising the money, and deciding where we'd stay, how long it'd take, all those kind of things. And we hired bikes from a company in Cambodia. When we got there, they were mountain bikes. We had panniers. We actually got a company that sponsored us for those, so we could carry stuff with us. And we visited about 17 organizations during the ride, and other NGOs, other educational organizations, a few of the other schools that were part of this same project. We also visited them, and we took with us some teaching materials because we did some English classes and some environmental awareness classes as we rode. So those organizations kind of were the pinpoints of where we stopped and stayed.
So for the bike ride, you started in Phnom Penh?
We started in Siem Reap, which is near Angkor Wat, which is near where the school was built.
And then from there you went to Phnom Penh?
We set off from our school, which is on a road that runs towards the Thai border in a very rural place. It was an unpaved road. It was very bumpy, and it was about a 2-hour drive north of Siem Reap. So from the school, we headed down to Battambang, which is kind of the third biggest city. Not so famous, but it's a tourist destination also. A nice city, very nice city. And we followed around the lower edge of the Tonle Sap lake, and we did come into Phnom Penh. We spent a few nights in Phnom Penh. Then we headed down to the coast via a town called Kep and ended up at Sihanoukville, which is one of the big it's the big tourist resort basically on the Cambodian coast. stayed there a few nights. Then we looped back to Phnom Penh, spent another few nights in Phnom Penh, and then we followed the Mekong River through the delta and across the border into Vietnam and into Ho Chi Minh City.
Oh, that's fantastic.
It's beautiful.
What were the road conditions like that you were riding on?
I'd say at least half, maybe more than half, were unpaved roads. Thankfully, Cambodia is very flat, so it wasn't so difficult. We averaged about 70, 80 kilometers a day, but on some days it was like 35 degrees, so it was hot. So we'd try to leave at around 6 o'clock in the morning. A lot of mornings we saw the sunrise. We'd grab some breakfast at a roadside market or something, noodles, that kind of stuff. And so the roads were unpaved, and the dirt in Cambodia is very red. It's like a red clay.
But very dusty, though, right?
Very dusty, so we had to wear scarves around our faces. When we arrived in the evenings at our destination, we were absolutely filthy. And I always looked at myself and thought, wow, I got such a great tan today. And then I got out of the shower and realised it was all dirt, completely dirt. So we'd have to, a lot of Cambodians, so I think it's called a kramer. It's a kind of scarf they wear around their mouth, and like when they travel in the back of trucks and things, because the dust is phenomenal.
Although the dust in some ways might have helped with the maybe sun protection or from the rays. Did you find that, like, because you were covered in dust, that maybe like you didn't get sunburn?
I did put a lot of sunscreen on every day because I was worried about that, and perhaps it did protect us, in that way. It just made us dirty.
So what do the locals think? So you're driving through, this is, Cambodia is a very rural country.
It is, and we chose some of the most rural areas because we wanted to see some of the more picturesque areas. I mean, it's stunning. The landscape there is stunning. There's a word in Cambodian language for foreigner, which is barang, and we got very used to hearing this word. Kids would come running across the field shouting barang, 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 and they'd line the roads and they'd be like, hello, 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 I love you, hello, hello. So we got used to this waving and cheering. I think they probably thought we looked like from another planet because we were on these quite high-tech mountain bikes laden with front and rear panniers. We had some film equipment with us. A friend of ours had put a bracket on the front of his handlebars with a camera on it, and we often would have our iPods, our digital cameras out. They probably had never seen anything like us coming through. And then when we'd stop at these roadside kind of cafes, we'd just lay our bikes down beside the road, and they'd all come round but they were so polite and courteous and very reserved people. They never touched any of our stuff. They were always very respectful, and I had a very positive experience. Before we went there, I met quite a few people, quite a few Cambodians even, who said, oh, you can't do it, it's dangerous, you can't do it, you're going to get robbed, there's bandits, it's going to be really dangerous. And we didn't encounter a single danger. And in the whole 2 months, 6 riders, we had 1 puncture in the whole time. It was amazing. It was absolutely
You
amazing.
only had 1 flat tire?
1 flat tire. That was it. And we had no problems with the bikes.
And these are bumpy roads.
Bumpy roads. Yeah, we were blessed. We went and had a blessing in a Buddhist temple before we set out, and then the monk blessed us for safe travel, blessed our bikes, and that was a nice ritual to do before we embarked on but it worked.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
What was the hardest thing about the trip?
The hardest thing was seeing this country. It was so beautiful and with such amazing people, but struggling in so many different ways with so many different things. Historically, the legacy of Pol Pot on the country, this huge discrepancy between the rich and the poor. So as we're cycling along these unpaved roads beside farmers on carts that are being pulled by water buffalo, there's these huge 4x4s screaming through, not paying any attention to anybody, driving. There's no law, there's no road law, so they could drive whatever speeds they wanted, tearing up the earth, causing accidents. I witnessed an accident, and that was particularly hard to deal with. The car that caused the accident didn't stop, and the guy that was left in the dust didn't have much chance. The locals, I guess, tried to get him to a hospital or whatever, but the medical conditions, there's not much going on in terms of rural hospitals. The people still dying from poor sanitation, water, malaria, these kind of things that we should be able to eradicate, instantly, that we have the knowledge and the know-how to do, but still struggling with that. And, being aware that education is so important and that people aren't getting it.
Yeah. What was the best thing about the journey?
The best thing about the journey was going to this place that seemed so exotic, and getting to see, how people live there, and how they smile at everybody. Like the people of Cambodia was so friendly and so peaceful and so, I don't know, welcoming. It made me realize how privileged I really am in life, and things that I take for granted. My education and the choices I have and things like that. And the beauty and mystery of Angkor Wat it's one of the 7 wonders of the world. I think these temples, these incredible temples, getting to go there, and we took some of the kids from the school there, these kids who live in the area who had never even been there. We went on a school trip with them and took them, and they got to going through these temples in the jungle with these young kids, and it was really awesome.
Oh, that's a great experience.
Really, yeah.
So on your bike trip, how did you feed yourself? What did you eat?
Hydration was the thing that we worried about. We were able to stop every few kilometers and get fresh young coconuts with the straw in the top. You ever drink that?
That's great.
Yeah, so
yeah.
That's like a natural IV hit straight there. You can live very well just roadside stalls. Breakfast in the street markets. Most Cambodians eat breakfast on the way to work. They gather at the market, and there's people there selling noodles and the most incredible just homemade stuff.
So what was a typical breakfast?
Noodles, usually noodles, some kind of noodles in a soup, like noodle soup, I guess, probably like in Vietnam, pho, they call it. But Cambodians have a similar thing. A lot of dishes with coconut milk. Not as spicy as Thai food, but a lot of coriander, we call it in the UK. You call it, what do you call it? Cilantro, you call it in America.
Uh-huh. Sounds good.
Yeah, oh, fabulous, yeah. And coconut.
And I would imagine a lot of fruit?
Let's see, in Cambodia did we get a lot of fruit? Not that much fruit, actually, in Cambodia. In Vietnam, I remember the mangoes when we crossed the border. It was very different, even though there's neighbouring countries. It was a very different kind of cuisine when we crossed into Vietnam. Palm sugar, cane sugar. We drank a lot of cane sugar. Cane sugar drink.
So during the day, how many times would you usually eat?
We'd eat breakfast, usually within the first hour. Oh, the coffee. I remember the coffee. Coffee's made with condensed milk in Cambodia, so that was a staple, a big shot of Cambodian coffee with condensed milk in it. We'd have breakfast. We would try and do the bulk of our riding. We try and do like 60k if possible before lunch, because it got too hot in the afternoons. And we wanted to arrive wherever we were getting before dark, because we didn't really, the roads weren't safe. And then we'd stop for lunch somewhere, but we'd also make it a rest stop. And because we didn't all cycle at the same pace, it would probably be about 2 hours or so by the time we all arrived in the same place at lunch. Again, rice is a staple, and then whatever they had going, these lunchtime cafes. And then our evening meal would be probably when we arrived at our guest house or the town that we were at. So we'd have 3 meals a day, usually.
And then at night you would just stay in a guest house?
At night we'd usually stay, we stayed in guest houses, yeah.
So how did you feel when you finally reached the end of your trip?
Both elated and saddened. It was a real sense of achievement that we made it, but I wanted it to go on forever. Like, I then had to fly back out from Ho Chi Minh. We had a few days in Ho Chi Minh just to kind of celebrate that we'd got to the end, but I had to come back to Japan, so I flew back via Bangkok and then back to where my husband was actually waiting. He'd been waiting 2 months, so it was nice to come home. You know, I realized when I got to the end that I really missed my husband, but during the trip I was very at peace and enjoyed it, and it could have just gone on forever, I think.
Cycled around the world.
Cycle around the world, yeah. I realized that, that's how you do it. It's so pleasurable to do it, to ride.
Wow, sounds like an incredible trip. I'm sure you'll never forget it.
Yeah, no, never, no.